The stars had belonged to Supreme Overlord Xyrex for 400 years. Not metaphorically. Not in the poetic sense that lesser species used when they described dominion. Literally. Every star system within 900 light-years of the Xyrex hegemony's core worlds had been catalogued, taxed, exploited, or sterilized, whichever was most profitable at the time. The hegemony's warfleets were the largest ever assembled in known galactic history, each vessel a cathedral of destruction, crewed by species bred over millennia for obedience and violence. Supreme Overlord Xyrex himself was not a warrior. He did not need to be. He was an architect of fear, of dependency, of the kind of systematic control that required no violence at all, because every civilization that had ever considered resistance had been made into an example before the thought finished forming. The humans had been found 62 years ago. That was, by every measurable standard, not enough time. It was not enough time to develop faster-than-light travel independently. Not enough time to build warships of consequence. Not enough time to reverse engineer hegemony technology from the single damaged probe their scientists had somehow, impossibly, managed to capture and disassemble. The hegemony's xenological analysts had filed a unanimous report: Homo sapiens represent a promising tributary species. Recommend standard extraction protocol. Timeline to full compliance, 40 years. The report had been filed 62 years ago. No extraction fleet had returned. Admiral Darian Voss stood at the forward observation window of the Unbroken, and did not blink. He had learned to do that, to simply stand still and look, without expression, without hurry, because it unnerved aliens. Every species the hegemony had absorbed shared certain behavioral tells for authority: posturing, vocal dominance, chemical signaling, ritual display. Humans did all of those things too, when necessary. But they also had this other quality, something that hegemony behavioral analysts had never successfully categorized in 62 years of study. Stillness that was not submission. Patience that was not weakness. The kind of quiet that came not from fear of saying the wrong thing, but from already having decided what came next. The Unbroken was not the largest ship in the fleet Admiral Darian Voss commanded. It was the seventh largest, by mass. He preferred it that way. Commanding officers who rode the flagship were predictable, and Admiral Darian Voss had spent his career making himself anything but. Behind the Unbroken, in a formation that hegemony tactical software was currently refusing to classify, because it did not match any known combat doctrine, were 41 other vessels. 42 human warships. Against the 617 vessels of Supreme Overlord Xyrex's Grand Punitive Armada. The Armada had arrived 3 days ago at the edge of the Sol system, broadcasting on every frequency a single message in 212 languages, including 7 that humanity had not officially admitted to knowing. You have been found in violation of Hegemony Statute 7, Article 9, unauthorized destruction of sovereign hegemony assets. This fleet is authorized to collect payment in kind. Compliance will be rewarded with a swift transition. Resistance will not be remembered, because there will be no one left to remember it. Admiral Darian Voss had listened to the message 17 times. Not because he needed to. Because he was counting something in the rhythm of the hegemony's certainty, the precise pitch of an empire that had never, in 400 years, been told no by someone who could back it up. He keyed the fleet-wide channel. "All hands," he said. "This is Admiral Voss. They outnumber us 14 to 1. I want everyone to remember something before this begins." The channel was silent. 4,912 human beings waited. They've never fought anyone who wanted to win more than they wanted to survive. He paused. We have that advantage. Don't waste it. Voss out. Supreme Overlord Xyrex watched the engagement from the command throne of the Eternal Dominion, the largest warship ever constructed, and felt something he had not felt in 119 years of rule. Confusion. The human formation had opened with a move his tactical systems had flagged as suicidal, a direct charge, 16 vessels accelerating at maximum thrust directly into the armada's center mass. His fleet commanders had responded textbook perfectly, collapsing inward to envelope and destroy the charging ships. It was the correct response. It was the response that had worked against every species that had ever tried aggression in the face of overwhelming numbers. The 16 human ships had died. All of them. But they had not died quickly, and they had not died quietly, and the armada vessels that had moved to envelope them were now, his tactical officer was repeating this in a voice that kept cracking with disbelief, no longer responding. The 16 human ships had been carrying something. Not weapons. Something his analysts were still trying to classify. Some kind of localized gravity inversion system, miniaturized to a scale the hegemony had theorized was a century away from any civilization's reach. The ships hadn't attacked the armada. They had collapsed 17 of the armada's vessels from the inside out, using the armada's own envelopment maneuver as the trigger. 62 years. 62 years, and they had done this. The remaining 26 human ships, led by a vessel his system identified as the Unbroken, had used the chaos of that moment to do something his tactical AI refused to categorize as a viable strategy, because it required a degree of coordinated risk that no sane species would accept. They had split into single ships. 26 individual human warships, each one attacking a different critical hegemony node simultaneously, not striking to destroy but striking to disable, targeting drive systems, communication arrays, weapons coordination relays, hitting points that required the armada to protect rather than pursue. And the human ships were fast. Impossibly fast. Not because their drives were superior, they weren't, not by raw specifications, but because their pilots were making decisions at a speed that hegemony coordination doctrine had never accounted for. Humans did not wait for permission to adapt. Within 11 minutes, the armada had lost coherent formation. Within 23 minutes, 31 hegemony vessels were dead in space. Within 40 minutes, Supreme Overlord Zyrex, who had not personally feared anything in 119 years, was looking at a tactical display that showed 104 of his 617 ships as destroyed or non-functional, and the Unbroken on a direct intercept course for the Eternal Dominion. He opened a direct channel. Admiral Darian Voss accepted the communication. The face of Supreme Overlord Zyrex was not what he had expected. He had expected something monstrous, or grandiose, some theatrical expression of power. What he saw instead was something far more interesting, an old intelligence that had just encountered a variable it had not modeled. "You are Admiral Darian Voss," said Supreme Overlord Zyrex. The translation was flawless. "I am. You sent 16 ships to die. I sent 16 crews who understood the mission and volunteered for it." Admiral Darian Voss's voice was even. "That's a different thing." A silence. "What do you want?" said Supreme Overlord Zyrex. And the tone of it, 400 years of dominion compressed into a question, told Admiral Darian Voss everything. The Supreme Overlord was not asking from weakness. Not yet. But he was asking, which meant he was calculating, which meant he had already accepted a future in which this conversation mattered. "Withdrawal," said Admiral Darian Voss. "From Sol. From every system you've flagged for extraction within our sphere. Recognition of human sovereign space." He paused. "And the release of the 17 tributary species you've been holding as labor stock in the Koroth system. We'd like to have a conversation with them." Another silence. Longer. "You understand," said Supreme Overlord Zyrex, "that I have 500 vessels remaining." "I understand that," said Admiral Darian Voss. "And you understand that 62 years ago, your analysts said we'd need 40 years to comply. We spent those 62 years differently." He let that sit for a moment. "You've been running empires for 400 years. You know the difference between a civilization that fights because it has no choice, and one that fights because it has decided to." Supreme Overlord Zyrex was quiet for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had a quality that his subjects had never heard in it before. "What are you?" Admiral Darien Voss almost smiled. "We're the ones who said no," he said. And meant it. The Grand Punitive Armada withdrew from the Sol system 4 hours later. It was the first time in 400 years that a hegemony fleet had turned back from a declared punitive action. The message took 3 weeks to reach every corner of the hegemony's territory. The age of alien dominance did not end with a speech, or a treaty, or a single glorious battle. It ended the way most ages end, quietly, in the arithmetic of a calculation that no longer worked. Supreme Overlord Zyrex was still alive, still in power, still commanding 500 warships and 1,000 star systems. But 17 tributary species were already listening to human transmissions. And something, in the long memory of a galaxy that had spent 4 centuries learning to be afraid, had shifted. They said no, the transmissions said. And they meant it. The stars were no longer Zyrex's alone. They never really had been.